Can anyone smell that? The musty nettle stench of unsettled dust as middle-aged men pull out "Oh for England" jerseys that have sat in storage for nearly a full year. Because it can only mean one thing. The Six Nations is now just days away. It's a scent that brings with it a number of other things. Brian Moore, overripe adverts about the spirit of rugby, probably Lionel Boxis, a Scotland's injury crisis, this bloke, people in pubs trying to remember the breakdown laws, and the endless, eternal question of whether or not Italy are actually improving. And yet, it's a miracle that rugby in Italy ever made it to today's state as a much liked but little loved sport. Ever since Warwickshire's own brand of homoerotic egg tossing was first introduced to Italy by groups of French students and men returning to working class towns such as Treviso, after stints plying their trade in Boxis land, it has gone on to have one of the most difficult relationships with rugby of any World Cup nation. So let's start at the bit just after the beginning, back when the name Castro had very different connotations. The Italian Rugby Federation was formed in 1928, 1 year before Italy's first game, a 9-0 loss against Spain, by, and this is where the surprises begin, the government of fascist dictator Benito Mussolini. In the early 20th century, Mussolini identified rugby as the perfect tool to spread his fascist ideals, an idea since adopted by Israel Folau. But whereas Folau's inspired decision to use a sport about hard tackles and soft hands to spread homophobic twattery extended to a few posts on Instagram, Mussolini set up a whole propaganda committee exclusively dedicated to making rugby the nation's #1 sport amongst young men. Their first action was to rename rugby, deciding it was instead a modern version of an ancient Roman game called Palla Valle, invented in Italy and therefore an incredibly patriotic thing for young men to play. This sport was then pushed nationwide as a means of creating the kind of men Mussolini wanted. After all, unlike Israel Folau, he doesn't just want every man in front of him. He wants them strong, stern and willing to forego pain and individual desire for the betterment of a team at large. Rugby grew across the nation, but in the process bought more into the rugby ideals pushed by the BBC adverts than fascist flyers. Inclusion, treating others equally, the general ideas of rugby being a hooligans game, play, but... And so, with such resistance growing in the sport, in 1931 Mussolini dropped the committee and redirected all efforts to spreading a new sport known as Velata, which he hoped would kill rugby. Now, seeing as you're not watching a channel called Squidge Velata, I think you can work out how that one went. But if anyone thinks rugby's origins in an upper-class, fee-paying school are right-wing, Velata was devised in a boardroom by members of the Fascist Party. Understandably, a game designed in that sweatshop of anti-fun never took off, but it did have an impact on the then ongoing growth of rugby in Italy, with towns where Velata was introduced most successfully soon just dropping the whole holding the ball shit and going back to playing football, leading to a 2018 where rugby, while still a notable sport in Italy, particularly in the north, scarcely demands 5% of football's crowds. That said, the Italian national team also hit their best patch when they too gave up on holding the ball and became reliant on just hoofing the thing. Back in the days of Diego Dominguez and Alessandro Troncon, masterclass halfbacks and arguably two of the three best players Italy has ever had. These two are pretty much double-handedly responsible for bringing Italy up the tiers, making their case for inclusion in the then five nations unignorable, and hence Dominguez and Troncon can basically be blamed for the inclusion of 6th place in the Six Nations, a spot Italy have dutifully filled most years since. Italy were introduced to the Six Nations in the year 2000, meaning the final game of this year's championship will be their 100th match in the tournament, and yet of these 95 games, Italy have won just 12, their most recent victory being right back in 2015. The man currently tasked with changing that is former Harlequins director of rugby, Conor O'Shea. Under O'Shea, Italy have managed just 6 wins in 28 games, with only one of those being over a Tier 1 nation, and many of the losses being substantial blowouts. But what O'Shea is currently trying to do for Italian rugby is about a lot more than just a win-loss-draw ratio. It's ironic considering his Quins team played like a gymnast whose balls just caught on fire, but O'Shea is a man unafraid to play the slow game. Whereas previous coaches Nick Mallett and Jacques Brunel focus on scraping individual wins, O'Shea's approach is far more long-term. His first action after getting the job was to appoint former Ireland Academy chief Steve Aboud as the head of technical direction for players and coaches, and put a big focus on youth and grassroots rugby, especially in traditional rugby towns that were never put off by Mussolini's bullshit. The idea was to turn places like Treviso and Parma into proper rugby hotbeds, areas where rugby is religion and Sergio Parise is Pope. 3 years since planting these seeds, the first signs of success have started to bloom. Last year, Italy Under-20s achieved their best ever finish at the World Junior Championships, the Italy Under-17s beat France, and the Under-18s beat England for the first time ever. Those young players have also started to filter into the national team. Razzmatazz fullback Matteo Minozzi made my team of the year 2018, but will unfortunately miss the Six Nations after a power cut struck his electric feet, and crash and smash turnover king Jake Pelledri, the most patriotic Italian to ever have a West Country accent, has also unfortunately been ruled out of the tournament after proving himself to be a true international class 7 last year. This leaves a lot on the broad blue shoulders of Sebastian Negri, whose fantastic breakthrough season last year seemingly only drew attention because Matteo Bassero made an attempt to join Folau's new political party and threw him a homophobic slur. Nevertheless, Negri is a workhorse with real athleticism, and for me, Italy's one to watch heading into the Six Nations and the World Cup beyond. O'Shea's patience can also be seen in his tactics. For years, the Italian game plan was most accurately described by drawing a little picture of Sergio Parisse flexing. However, since O'Shea took over, he's approached things rather differently. O'Shea approaches each game individually. Although there is an overall game plan, Italy don't really have a recognisable style, instead utilising plays tailored to the team they're facing. O'Shea trialled his team's ability to learn afresh week on week on week in the 2017 Six Nations. Each game, O'Shea had his players try one tiny new innovation, a fresh idea, before discarding from the game plan in favour of something else the following week. Most famous was the hilarious Eddie Jones hissy fit no ruck scandal, but against Wales they formed a massive mid-match mauls, and against France they'd run a runner on the inside of a pod all match. This makes it very hard to know what to expect when playing Italy. For all the talk of the usual switch off after 60 minutes, this season both top flight clubs in the Pro 14 have looked far better conditioned and are both enjoying their best ever seasons, with Benetton currently sat in the playoff places. O'Shea's been very hands-on for both sides, leading training sessions and visiting both several times a week, the idea being a trickle-up effect. Improving grassroots rugby will improve the age group sides, improving the age group sides will improve the Pro 14 sides, and improving the Pro 14 sides will eventually lead to the Italian national team becoming really good. Progress might be slow, but it's certainly happening. Italy do have to go to this year's championship as favourites for Troncon and Dominguez's coveted wooden spoon, and it's very hard to see them pulling themselves for a pool containing both South Africa and the All Blacks come September. But each time the musky smell of that shirt with the armpits of solid dried sweat drifts out of the cupboard, we get a little bit closer to no longer having to ask the big Italian question, but rather just looking back at what O'Shea has done and remembering Rome was not built in a day. Today represents the day in which there are 3 more sleeps until the Six Nations, which is very exciting. However, it's also an exciting date for another reason, which is that it is the 1-year anniversary of me uploading the first video to this channel, me starting Squidge Rugby. And at the time I had all kinds of plans, ambitions, things I wanted to do with the channel. I had targets I'd set myself, and I passed every single one of those targets, thanks to you guys, by April last year. So it continues to grow in directions I couldn't have anticipated, and to grow more than I ever thought was possible in rugby. And I just want to say thank you to every single person that's watched one of these videos, that has commented, be it to say that you enjoy the video, be it that you think I speak too quickly. Every single, although I didn't pick Jacob Stockdale, everyone that has shared one of the videos, everyone that's told their friends about the videos, everyone that looked at one of the videos passively on their screen as they're scrolling past and ignored it. Thank you to everyone that's in any way engaged in Squidge Rugby this last year. It's been amazing to be part of, particularly everyone that's thought it was worth chucking a few pennies at and supporting the channel on Patreon. I'm going to be redoing how I do the Patreon system, and the rewards you're going to be getting very soon. So hopefully be more for you guys coming up then, because I do really appreciate it. You've got me to a position which this is my main focus, the main thing I do, and that is something I didn't expect or think was entirely possible. So thank you to all of you. Additionally to Rugby Warfare, SQ20, if you want to get 20% off on their website. And because it's Six Nations time, because it's only, let's say, 3 sleeps away, I have set up a Squidge Rugby Fantasy League. The link is in the description, it's on Superbrew. If you do want to head there, you can find out that you know more about rugby than me when I inevitably finish lower mid-table. Until then, this has been the 6th video in an ongoing series on all the teams in the World Cup, and the first video in an unknown number of videos on this year's Six Nations. It's going to be very exciting, and there's only 3 more sleeps away. Thank you once more. See you then.